This is the story of a cute little thing, of a beautiful creature which ruled over the hearts of the royals, of a unique machine which captured the imagination of the masses. This is the story of Patiala State Monorail Trainway. About 100 years ago, in the princely state of Patiala, there was some 50 miles of a monorail system by the name of the Patiala State Monorail Trainway, or PSMT in short. Claimed to be the first commercial monorail of India, it was almost forgotten by 1945. It might well have been totally consigned to history, but for some occasional mentions. One such mention was made by J.R. Day and B.G. Wilson in the 1957 Frederick Muller publication titled Unusual Railways. Colonel C.W. Bowles, who had built the line, happened to come across it and sent some information and photographs to Mr. Day, who then wrote an article about it in the February 1962 issue of Railway World. This article triggered an effort to trace the existence of India's first monorail, as Mr. H.R. Ambler, a British railway historian, saw this article while in India and in due course went to Patiala. He visited the archives and also saw the remains of locomotives and rolling stock. He was put in touch with Colonel Bowles and an exchange of letters followed. This documentary is an effort to tell what is now known about the PSMT. In about 1900, Mr. Bowles, as a young engineer with a British firm, was laying out the site of the Bengal-Nagpur Railway Works at Kharagpur in Bengal. As he was having trouble with the narrow gauge contractor's tracks, he tried, successfully as it turned out, the Ewing monorail system. In this simple arrangement, some 95% of the weight of a vehicle is taken on a single rail and the rest on an additional wheel on an outrigger running on the ground at the side of the track. A year or two later, he chanced to visit the Sikh state of Patiala. He met the ruler, His Highness the Maharaja Sir Bhupinder Singh, and the two struck a friendship instantly. Bowles joined His Highness's service, in due course becoming state engineer. Bowles applied his Kharagpur experience by building a 15-mile line of monorail from Sarhind on the North Western Railway to Alampur and later to Morinda in British Punjab. One object of the line was to make use of the 560 government mules maintained by the state, as when there was no war anywhere, there was little for them to do. The line was built by the Bombay firm of Morsland and Price, which worked it until 1917, when the working was taken over by the state through a contractor. It was proposed to extend it to Ropar, but as it turned out, the NWR covered this instead, building a branch from Sarhind to Ropar via Morinda and extending it later to Nangal and the Bhakra Dam. When the Ropar branch of NWR was completed, the monorail was closed on October 1st, 1927. The peace between Alampur and Morinda seems to have been closed a little earlier. There had been some rather petty financial wrangles between Patiala and the Foreign Office of the Government of India about the road wheels wearing the road and whether or not taxis, which were beginning to appear, should be allowed to compete. Bowles said it was closed in 1914 when the mules were withdrawn, but it seems clear from the correspondence in the archives that it must have started up again. The only published information about this line, apart from the sources mentioned earlier, is in the 1908 edition of the Imperial Gazetteer of India. It seems to have attracted passengers in a memorandum of October 2nd, 1908, found among Colonel Bowles's papers. It is stated that it carried 20,000 passengers in a month, the fare for the 15 miles being 1.5 annas. Goods were carried at 1 anna per mound, roughly 18 pounds, for the same distance. There were some frustrations about the goods services. The station staff on the NWR at Sirhind were hostile, as they had been getting a rake off from the owners of the bullock carts. The second or main line from Patiala city to Sunam on the Ludhiana Hisar branch of the NWR was a more ambitious affair and is wrapped in much more mystery. The Imperial Gazetteer does not mention it, and it is not shown on the 1914 Ordnance map. Nothing about it has been found in the archives, and the evidence that it existed lies in Colonel Bowles's letters to Day and Ambler and in the 1908 memorandum mentioned earlier. According to Bowles, it started in a goods yard of the NWR by Patiala station, which was then on the north side of the through line from Rajpura Junction to Bhatinda. The monorail crossed it at a road level crossing, the NWR rails being notched to allow the grooved monorail wheels to cross. It then went through the walled city southwards to City Mandi, turned north to the cantonment lines along the side of the main road to Bhavanigarh and thence Sunam. The memorandum states that in 1908 it was complete as far as Bhavanigarh and that the Patiala Darbar had approved an extension to Sunam. Whether this was ever done is inconclusive. Bowles's letters are not explicit about it. What oral tradition there is now in Patiala city is that the extension was not made. Whether the line reached Sunam or not, it could not have lasted long. Bowles says, quote, "Later the traffic changed to motors and I removed the line," unquote. From the lack of mention of it in the 1908 Gazetteer and the 1914 survey, its whole life must have been between these dates. Why it should have been abandoned so long before the Sirhind line is strange. It does seem to have struck troubles from the beginning. Wooden sleepers were used instead of iron ones and they were badly attacked by termites. There were also difficulties with the neighboring state of Nabha, through which a short length of the road passed. Also, the road seems to have been too good for the health of the monorail, and one's guess is that the rapidly growing competition of road traffic made it not worthwhile to get over these other difficulties. Although one of the reasons for building the PSMT in the first place was to make use of the mules. It was decided to have steam power available against the contingency of the mules being withdrawn. 4 locomotives were accordingly made by the German firm of Ornstein and Koppel at a cost of 500 to 600 pounds each. There is no evidence that they ran on the Sirhind line at all. Bowles says it was found that the engines were too heavy for the 18 pounds per yard rail. He is clear, however, that steam trains did run between Patiala station and City Mandi, although he does not say for how long. The distance is about a mile, and roughly this length of heavier rail of about 60 pounds per yard was found stored by Ambler in the PWD yard at Patiala with the rest of the monorail equipment. The 4 engines, 2 more or less complete and 2 completely disassembled, with not much more than the frames left, were found stored together with a few coaches in an open-sided shed in a PWD yard in Patiala city. Ornstein and Koppel had been unable to furnish any details to Day, except some line drawings in about 1961. The wheel arrangement was 030, the middle wheel of 50 cm dia being flangeless. The other 2 had a double flange forming a groove 2.15 cm deep. The road wheel 98 cm dia was set at 7 feet from the rail. Wagons were normally 8 feet by 6 feet, with 2 8 inches dia rail wheels and 1 road wheel. In 1908, there were 75, costing about 40 pounds each. Passenger stock on the Sirhind line seems to have been open-sided two-wheelers with knife-board seating. There were 15 of these in 1908. In the shed at Patiala, there were the remains of some more ambitious coaches One was a closed coach with 8 platforms of normal light railway type. The other, which had once had a wash basin, was obviously a private saloon, probably Colonel Bowles's inspection saloon. Bowles says that there were also bogie goods wagons 30 feet long with 2 road wheels, and that some were converted to passenger use by fitting transverse benches. One feels that the monorail failed because it was a few years too late. It solved the problem of finding something better than the bullock cart just before the problem was solved better in a different way. The Sirhind line was just in time to be a success for a few years. The Sunam line was 2 years later, and with its unexpected difficulties, this was critically too late. It seems that the Maharaja continued to be interested in possibilities of monorail systems. His Highness died suddenly in 1935, and Bowles, who was on home leave at that time, did not have the heart to return to India. An incidental result of this was the loss of photographs of the monorail among the effects which remained behind. In 1962, the locomotives and the carriages were found buried along with other equipment in the PWD scrapyard in Patiala. Ambler, on his return to England in 1966, intended to visit Bowles but was held up for a week or two, and when he was ready to go and see him, Bowles fell ill and shortly afterwards died at the age of 90. Thus, he missed meeting a great character and further information about the monorail, which only had died with him. A recent visit to the site where the PWD yard once stood was not fruitful either, as a bustling marketplace has since come up all around the place. One locomotive was restored and a carriage rebuilt on the original underframe of the private inspection saloon of Colonel Bowles by the Northern Railway Workshop at Amritsar in 1976. Today, it ferries the visitors to the National Rail Museum in New Delhi. Another locomotive and a rebuilt carriage have been kept on display at the Northern Railway Workshop at Amritsar, reminding the visitors of a wonderful and a low-cost means of transport a fine Indian might have been, which failed because it was a few years too late.